Good morning and welcome to AmericaTalks. We begin first with a news report from GMA Integrated News. The death toll from Typhoon Doksuri, with the local name Egay, rose now to 14, nearly 2 days since it left the Philippine area of responsibility, according to the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. The latest data from the NDRMC also showed that number of affected people has also risen to over half a billion. At the news forum in Quezon City, Office of Civil Defense spokesperson and NDRMC Director Edgar Posadas read the latest situational report on Egay as of 8 a.m. on July 29. The typhoon has so far left 14 deaths, of which 6 are confirmed and 8 are for validation. At least 13 persons were injured and 20 were missing. The weather disturbance affected 582,288 individuals, or 164,430 families from 13 regions, 45 provinces, 306 cities and municipalities, and 1,752 barangays. Damage to houses was estimated at 195,000 pesos, while infrastructure damage amounted to 1,131,127,926.36 pesos. On Saturday, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. led the distribution of aid for residents affected of Typhoon Egay in Abra. Typhoon Egay left the Philippine area of responsibility on Thursday evening. Our thoughts and prayers are with our fellow kababayans as we continue to arouse from the impact of the typhoon that passed. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The 2024 elections are still 1 year away, but the races are heating up in both sides. In national Republican polls, former President Donald Trump is leading Florida Governor Ron DeSantis by a big margin, while in national Democratic polls, incumbent President Joe Biden is leading by a big whopping margin against his opponents. Vote parties, regardless of who is the incumbent, will hold primaries and caucuses in states and territories of the United States to determine the party nominees in the general election. Since 1972, no incumbent in both parties have lost their nomination. But after a close primary and caucus race, they went on to be defeated in the general election. Jimmy Carter in 1980, George H.W. Bush in 1992, and Donald Trump are the incumbent presidents who didn't lose the party nomination but defeated on the general election. For Democrats, their states to hold primaries are South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire, Nevada, and Michigan. Nevada and New Hampshire are still tentative on February 6. The Democratic National Committee expressed their full support to the re-election bid of President Joe Biden. As of this day, there are still no plans or announcement from the DNC to hold debates. The DNC has chosen Chicago, Illinois as host city of the 2024 Democratic National Convention. United Center will be the primary venue and McCormick Place will be the secondary venue. President Biden, environmental lawyer Robert Kennedy Jr., and author Marianne Williamson are running to win the nomination. One of them must win 1,888 delegates to be nominated. President Biden is expected to win the nomination. Meanwhile, on to the Republican side, the early states to hold primaries are Iowa, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Michigan. Nevada is tentative date, but New Hampshire is scheduled. The Republican National Committee has scheduled 2 debates. One will be on Pfizer Forum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that will be hosted by Fox News. Another will be on Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California, according to presidential candidate Nikki Haley. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley, Ohio businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina, and former President Donald Trump are the 7 who already met the requirements for the first debate. Former Governor Asa Hutchinson and former Vice President Mike Pence already met the polling bar requirements but needs more donors to be qualified. Milwaukee, Wisconsin will also host the 2024 Republican National Convention. Pfizer will also be the venue of the 2024 RNC. Burgum, Christie, DeSantis, radio host Larry Elder, Haley, former Texas Representative Will Hurd, Hutchinson, Michigan entrepreneur Perry Johnson, Pence, Ramaswamy, Scott, Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, and former President Trump are running to win the nomination. One of them must win 1,234 delegates to be nominated. For more on this, let's now turn to our guests. Today, we have Sean Duigon of Nonpartisan Polls. He is Capital News and Politics polling contributor. Good morning to you, Sean.
Good morning to you.
All right, I hope we could have a long conversation. Let's begin first with the Democratic primary. President Biden is leading, as I've said, by a big whopping margin. If you'll see the latest polling data, President Biden has 46% lead, 60% lead, 48, 57. With this polls, can this be a sign that President Biden can win the Democratic primaries via landslide?
I would say it's definitely possible, but there is this very small chance for like an upset simply because even like prior to like RFK Jr. and Williamson entering the race, there have been concerns regarding Biden's age in the race that is still playing a role even now because there's speculation now of other candidates potentially jumping in the race, feeling that Biden's too old, we need to move on to someone of a new generation. But otherwise, I'd say for right now, it looks like Democrats are focused on unifying behind Biden, so that could help contribute to a landslide victory.
All right. President Biden won South Carolina Democratic primary by 28.8% in 2020. That gives him the big break in the Democratic primary. While in Nevada, Senator Bernie Sanders in 2020 won it by 26.6%. New Hampshire, Senator Sanders won it by 1.3%. And President Biden won it Michigan by 16.5%. In this scenario, can we see a repeat, especially in New Hampshire, can we see a repeat of a close races between Biden, Kennedy, and Williamson?
I could easily see that just because precedence kind of shows that like states like New Hampshire have always kind of shown the potential of having a close race, even if it's an incumbent in there. And if you have a strong enough candidate, then they could have the potential to make the race very close, or even in an upset, the challenger ends up winning. That was seen back in 1952, like with Truman facing Estes Kefauver. Kefauver won in an upset, and 68 where Johnson won, Lyndon Johnson, but it was a very close race. So if Kennedy remains at the polling level he is, possibly gaining even more, then there's definitely potential you could see a close race between Biden and Kennedy in there. Right now, I don't see a win happening for Kennedy, but could happen in the future.
All right. I want to ask this because if the remarks of Robert F. Kennedy, I think that was denounced by his relatives. Denouncing his statements by his own family members, that does that have an effect in Kennedy's campaign?
Wait, sorry, what was that?
Um, the statements of his family members against denouncing him on his statements, does that have an effect on his campaign, Kennedy's campaign?
I would say yes and no. Where yes, obviously, considering that even his if even his own family isn't backing him, that's kind of not a good sign. But I think with as polling shown, it hasn't had too much of an effect because he's still polling pretty high for someone that is challenging an incumbent, which that I think has to do with several factors beyond that, including the fact that he does have the Kennedy name, so he still will get that name recognition. There is that level of opposition towards Biden being renominated, and that some of his views, while controversial, still have some appeal among the base, even if it's not to the level that Kennedy is at.
Okay. I recently conducted Capital News and Politics polling last July 5. I think you post this, that should the DNC hold Democratic presidential debates? Yeah, it caught my interest because in Instagram, 68% said they want the Democratic National Committee to hold Democratic presidential debates, while in Twitter, it's 42%. What do you think is the reason Instagram respondents and Twitter respondents have a different view on this question?
Uh, it seems like that could be like the different ideologies between each, because I remember I did take a look at that poll myself. And from what it looks like, I remember Twitter, it seems like there was more people against holding debates versus Instagram, where there was more people in support. And that could be because Twitter might, I feel like just from seeing it, might have a little more of a left pro Biden kind of lean and would rather not see him debate anybody. While Instagram, on the other hand, which I've seen that from my own polls I've conducted on the 2024 election, that it's a little more evenly divided. So, but generally, it seems like there's a little more support for Biden debating Kennedy just because of the level of polling that Kennedy's had, where in previous races, he would have been guaranteed, no doubt, that he would have been in the debate. So they kind of felt like that should be applied here as well.
All right, let's now go to the Republican uh, primaries. Former President Donald Trump, though he's indicted for, I think there will be a third time he will be indicted, is still leading in polls by a also big whopping margin, 36%, 43% lead, 44% lead. Does his indictment have an effect on his campaign?
Yes, I will say, and I definitely think the opposite effect that people were hoping. That I think people were hoping that as he gets like bogged down with all these indictments and legal cases, that he'll fall in the polls, but it's actually helped increase his support in the polls because of the calls that he and even other Republican candidates have made, arguing that it's the weaponization of the Justice Department. And because many believe that's, I feel like, explains how Trump went from kind of plurality to almost losing to DeSantis to now holding like at some points 60% in Republican primary polls, because they may not like Trump, but they're unified behind him against the indictments.
All right. Um, let's go to the DeSantis campaign. Some are saying that his campaign is a Jeb Bush 2.0 level, and I think he announced he will reboot his campaign. I'll ask you on it personally. What happened to Governor Ron DeSantis's presidential campaign? Is his campaign off to a bad start, or he started his campaign into a good start?
I would say he definitely started off very badly. Like, for one, I will say this based on my personal stance that I think if DeSantis entered earlier in the race, like not long after the midterms, he would have been at a much better spot, because he would have ridden on that popularity he had by winning re-election as governor of Florida by 20 points, and the fact that many people blamed Trump for the losses that Republicans had in the 2022 midterms, where there was points where DeSantis actually led Trump in primary polls. But current campaign wise, I would also say, because of signs like his campaign announcement on Twitter going poorly, his fundraising results, I definitely agree where it looks like it's on the path like Jeb Bush. But I would also compare it to a different Republican candidate from 2016, Scott Walker, considering that he once was at, before Trump's entry, he was the front runner, but then soon he and his campaign also ended up tanking to the point where eventually he dropped out before the end of the year. So you could see something like that happen with DeSantis unless he makes a recovery, which I think we'll have to see. And the upcoming debate, like later in August, I think will probably be the sign to tell.
All right. In Iowa 2016, since that's the first in the primary calendar next year, former President, then candidate Trump won it by 3.3% against his opponent, Senator Ted Cruz. Can we see a close Iowa race between Trump and DeSantis, or can we see a big, big victory for Trump in Iowa?
I would say it's definitely possible you could see a close race in Iowa, considering like in 2016, where Ted Cruz actually won that primary caucus narrowly by like 3 points, even though I think it was generally expected that Trump would win that caucus. And you could see a very similar result, especially as we get closer and likely that more candidates drop out and consolidate behind a single challenger. May that be like DeSantis or even somebody else like Nikki Haley or Tim Scott. And you could see either a close race between Trump and somebody else, or even another challenger winning, even if narrowly.
All right. Um, well, in Nevada, President then candidate Trump won the primary by 22%, New Hampshire 19.5%, South Carolina 10%, and Michigan 11.6%. Can we see a Trump landslide if we'll based on the polls? Can we see a Trump landslide in the primaries, or can we see a surprise with DeSantis? Let's say hypothetically DeSantis gains a big lead in the race. Can we see that situation?
I would say it's definitely possible, but as of right now, it's currently not looking likely. Like, I've even done my own hypothetical research regarding that, and you could still see something where I definitely see something where Trump wins a lot of those early primaries generally easily. And current polling right now shows that that is likely, but based off polling from DeSantis and the other candidates, I would still say it is very possible where you could see close races where Trump wins a couple, but then like DeSantis wins a couple. And that could even show a sign for like Super Tuesday coming up, where it could end up being a really back and forth between like Trump and DeSantis, or even somebody else rising up out of the woodworks.
All right. Former President Trump, I think, said in a Truth Social post that he might not attend the Republican presidential debate on August 23. If he will not attend the debate, can that have an effect? Or he's attending? Can if not, if he's not attending, can that have an effect on his campaign?
Definitely possible, since I've usually historically debates usually were the opportunity for other candidates, no matter if they were like the front runner, the main opposition, or even like small candidates. Usually that's their opportunity to rise rise up and gain traction. And now Trump, I think, has a decent amount of support in his own party where it might not waver too much. But if Trump doesn't attend, that could still give an advantage to the other candidates in the race and could give him the opportunity to rise, whether that's DeSantis regaining traction or even somebody else doing really well and them getting a giant boost.
All right. Final question: can we see a Biden versus DeSantis versus Trump race in 2024?
Yes, I definitely can see that. As of right now, I'd say it looks like Trump is on the path to winning renomination, but there is definitely room where if for DeSantis to win the nomination, and seeing Trump's rhetoric regarding like the 2020 election, you could easily see something where Trump decides, guys, just screw everybody, I'm going to run as an independent, which in that case, I would actually expect a Biden landslide, just because the Republican vote would split between DeSantis and Trump, while the Democrats would be unified behind Biden.
All right. Let's go to final question. I think the No Labels group, if they nominated a presidential candidate and Trump wins a Republican nomination, can the No Labels third candidate have an effect? Which campaign do you think will have an effect? Biden campaign or the Trump campaign? If the No Labels nominates a presidential candidate.
I would say it kind of depends on like who No Labels ultimately nominates. I think regardless, because of how unpopular both Biden and both Trump are, that No Labels could actually have a chance to either have a really strong third party performance or even actually be up there with the other candidates as with the potential to win. But it also depends on like who they nominate, whether they nominate Joe Manchin or they nominate Larry Hogan, who are the two speculated right now. And the argument was is that it will end up affecting Democrats most because they would pull from independents and anti-Trump Republicans that likely would back Biden and help Trump give Trump the victory. But I also feel like it could end up hurting the Trump campaign as well if they pull from enough Republicans, depending on who they nominate, considering that Manchin had appeal among conservative voters, while Hogan has appeal among moderate, even to liberal voters because of his policy stances.
All right. If Biden and Trump will have a rematch, the election vote result in 2020 was 362-32, favoring for Biden. If a Biden-Trump rematch will happen again, can we see President Biden winning states such as North Carolina, Ohio, Florida?
Uh, North Carolina definitely possible. I would say Ohio maybe, because there could be that coattail effect because Sherrod Brown, a Democrat, is an incumbent senator, is running for reelection. Florida, it's very slim chance just because of how politically it's trended over the last few years, trending very Republican. But I also say there is the possibility, going back to the previous question, because of how unpopular both candidates are, that you could see a repeat of 2016 where even if no major third party emerges, that you could still see a lot of people vote for third party candidates because they don't want they don't like Biden or Trump, and that could end up having a opposite effect for Biden where he ends up losing a couple states because of those extra third party votes.
So, can we see a lower voter turnout if a Biden Trump rematch happens?
Definitely could see that, considering that recent polling had shown that as much as about a third of voters don't want to see a Biden Trump rematch. So you could definitely see the opposite of the last election where there was really high turnout. While here you could see lower turnout because people will be like, well, I don't like either one of them, so I'm just not going to vote.
Alright, thank you so much, Sean Duigon, Capital News and Politics polling contributor. Have a great day and I hope to see you again.
No problem. You too.
Thank you. And that's it for second episode of America Talks. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads account. Just search for at Capital News Post and subscribe us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/ at Capital News Post. Sorry, at Capital News Post. Until then, I'm Ethan Vargas from the Philippines. Salamat and mabuhay.